so much. How can you tell that Monica was the kettle coordinator for 2 years? Everyone else thinks Monday, and she thinks it's kettles. She knows. Tomorrow is the start of kettles. Now that just makes, that sends shivers down the spine, doesn't it? So exciting. But for that, in the Salvation Army, of course, means it is the start of Christmas season. And in spite of what Caitlin wants, we're not putting up our Christmas decorations yet.
Why not?
Because that's pushing it too much. But it's the start of Christmas season for us. Six weeks of counts. I'm going to preach a Christmas message today, of course, but I couldn't help but think about the whole idea of what Christmas is about. And I was reminded of the third verse of the Christmas carol, Joy to the World. And in the third verse, at least according to our songbook, our new songbook, we get these words. It says, "No more let sin and sorrow grow, nor thorns infest the ground. He comes to make his blessings flow, far as the curse is found." Far as the curse is found. Now the words there, as far as the curse is found, reflects or recollects the third chapter of Genesis. Well, I preached on that a long time ago in our series on the fantastic journey. But I couldn't help but remember that. And it comes in the story of the sin of Adam and Eve, what we usually call the fall. And its resulting consequences, the curse, if you like. See, their sin had very far-reaching effects, not just on their own lives, but on all of creation and every person who's lived in the world ever since, right to this very day. So on these next three Sundays, today and the next 2 Sundays, we're going to do kind of a pre-Advent series. Joy to the World is about the fact that Jesus came into the world, but the question is, why? Why did he come? And that's what we're going to look at. The simple answer is, far as the curse is found. He came because of the curse that resulted from Adam and Eve's original sin that we continually fall into. And his salvation is to be found dealing with the curse. Jesus answers the fall. Jesus answers the resulting curse. So we're going to have a look at 3 ways in which Adam and Eve's sin, the fall, still touches us today. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is what we call broken relationships. Now, I'm going to invite you to turn to Genesis chapter 3. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to pull out highlighted bits and pieces of it. Now, most of us are familiar with the story of the fall. Most of us have read it, The serpent, Satan, comes along and, he tempts Eve and he says, "Hey, nice looking fruit, right?" And she sees it, it looks good for, acquiring good knowledge. Says, maybe God didn't really mean it when he said we'd die. So she takes a bite, hands some to Adam. He takes a bite. And what's the first thing that the Bible says happened? It says all of a sudden they realized that they were naked. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read something like that in the Bible, I'm thinking, what? What is that all about? What is this great spiritual significance of suddenly these 2 people, husband and wife, who've been there for who knows how long, there's no one else around, and all of a sudden they realize that they're naked? How is this a big spiritual deal? Well, it really is very important in understanding a lot about who we are. You see, because the whole idea of the nakedness has to do with intimacy. And intimacy is a vitally important thing for human beings. You see, to be intimate is to be fully exposed to the other person. Where we're hiding nothing. Where we're totally open. We're fully known. No secrets. Being unself-consciously naked, as Adam and Eve were, symbolized the absolute intimacy that they shared in their relationship one with another. They had that total openness. They had, quite literally, nothing to hide. That was physically, but it was more than physically. It was emotionally, psychologically, intellectually. Everything about who they were in complete intimacy. Which is something that human beings naturally want and need. But as soon as they fell into sin, all of a sudden they moved from intimacy to alienation. All of a sudden that closeness, that lack of anything between them is gone. The shame of realizing that they were naked speaks to that break in their actual capacity for intimacy. They were no longer able to have the kind of intimate, open, fully open, hiding nothing relationship that they had enjoyed for who knows how long. Rather than openness in their relationship, now all of a sudden there were barriers between them, symbolized by the clothing that they suddenly had to wear. And the barriers are found in really two things. First is real shame. You know, that's the things that we feel, the guilt that we feel over the things that we've done. And who of us has never done something that we regret and feel very bad about? Shame is not something that we talk a lot about in Western culture, but in many cultures, shame is a huge, huge issue. But it creates that barrier as we look at ourselves and we fail and we see ourselves as being less than we're supposed to be, and we feel really bad about it. But there's also false shame. There's also false shame, and that's prevalent in human existence. You know, that's things like the negative self-image where we fail to see ourselves as we really are, and we put ourselves down, thinking we're less than we actually are, where we fail to recognize the value that God has given to us. It's feelings of inadequacy and lack of value, usually based on nothing. Often it's simply because someone has constantly told us that we're worthless, that we'll never amount to anything, that you're just a failure, and we start to feel that. And maybe the person who told us that is ourselves. You ever look in the mirror and say, "Ugh, who is that? Where'd that gray hair come from? You know? Oh, I don't like that nose." Whatever. You know? Feel those things. And when we start to feel those, we become closed in on ourselves. And we don't easily share that even with the people who are closest to us. That intimacy is gone. And what happens when we lose our capacity for intimacy? This is what we see unfold through the scriptures. The first thing that happens is the first relationship that's broken is actually with ourselves. Now, we don't usually think of ourselves as having a relationship with ourselves. I mean, after all, you know, you see someone walking down the street talking to themselves, you know, having a good old conversation. What do you think, right? But that's not what I'm talking about. You know, it's how kind of integrated people are we? I don't know who thinks I'm available on Sunday morning on the phone. As long as it's not God calling. But that relationship with ourselves, I mean, it really starts with a sense of shame. You know, you look what happens as they start to feel shame. You know, even if it's just that negative body image, what do? They cover themselves up. They literally went into hiding. They were no longer happy with themselves and who and what they were, and they didn't want to be exposed. Not to each other and not to God. They had to go into hiding. And suddenly they lost their integrity. Now, when you think of integrity, what do you think of? You think of somebody who's, completely honest and upright, always does the right thing. But, it's not just that. I mean, one definition says it's an adherence to moral and ethical principles. It's a soundness of moral character and honesty. And, that's what we normally think of it. But integrity is actually more than that. It comes from being a state of being whole, entire, undiminished, where everything is together. It's a sound, unimpaired, perfect condition. That's really what it is to have integrity, where every bit of our being works together for the single solitary purpose, and we don't have parts of our being, pulling us in opposite directions. You've seen the cartoon. You got the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other, and he's trying to get you to go the other way, knowing that that's really just a reflection of who we are. We don't need the angel and the devil, but we do get that. That is a reality. But just parts of ourselves pulling us in different directions because we no longer have that integrity. We're broken. We're missing pieces, and the pieces don't fit together anymore. And we really see that above all when God comes to them and says, "What's going on? What have you done?" And rather than take responsibility for their actions, Adam says, "She did it." He can't take responsibility for his own actions. People like to blame Eve, right? Because she's the one who the devil tempted. She's the one who gave in, so it's all Eve's fault. But we forget, where was Adam at the time? Standing right next to her. He'd say, "Whoa!" So now he doesn't take responsibility. He says it's her fault. And what does Eve say? "Not my fault. The serpent, it's his fault. He deceived me." See, they lack the integrity now. The pieces are pulling apart. Their relationship with themselves is broken. So what do we do about that? Our own relationship with ourselves is restored first and foremost by confession. First thing we have to do is confess our sins. We don't pretend to be something that we're not. We were talking about this morning, the idea of, does it ever bother you when we say, that we're not worthy? As Christians, we're not worthy of God's love. Does it ever bother you? Because it sounds like it's diminishing us and saying we're not of any value. But it's not that at all. It's not that at all. This is not meant as a put down. It's just an understand who you are. And we have to understand that in and of ourselves, we don't have worth. But I'll tell you what we do have. It's value. I used the illustration. I got Clarice gave me a $20 bill. I didn't get to keep it, but I said, take the $20 bill, and how much is that $20 bill worth? I mean, there's about half a cent worth of plastic and ink in there, right? And that's what the $20 bill is worth. Because that's what's in and of itself. It's inherent worth. But what's its value? $20. Why? Because we say so. Well, what's our worth? In and of ourselves, it's nothing. But what's our value? Our value is set by what was paid for us. What was paid for us is that Jesus died on the cross. The very God of gods, the Lord of lords, the creator of heaven and earth, came to the world and died on the cross that we may live. He gave his life for ours. What does that tell us about our value? It's incredible. It's immeasurable. We need to understand who we are and accept that. And don't pretend to be anything else. But don't settle for being less than what God intends you to be. We need to take responsibility for ourselves, for our actions, and our response to what God has done. Knowing who we are is not a negative thing. It is the most positive thing that we can ever do moving forward. And it all starts with simple confession of our need for God. Well, the second relationship that is broken is one that's pretty obvious, and that's the relationship with other people. Sin breaks our relationship with other people. That's where that intimacy comes in. I mean, you just look, we've already talked about it, how it's demonstrated between Adam and Eve. You know, they who were so intimate, who wouldn't hide from anything from each other, who were inseparable, and all of a sudden they said, no, it's her fault. No, it's his fault, not me. Don't blame me. You know, it's the blaming others all of a sudden. You see, it's the lack of love. I mean, when Adam looks and says to God, she did it, how much love is he showing towards his wife? Is that love? Blame it? I mean, it all flows out of pride. Because it can't be my fault. It can't be my fault. It has to be somebody else's fault. And pride destroys relationships. Yeah, and we see that in God's description of the marriage that Adam and Eve are going to have in verse 16. You know, and I think sometimes we don't quite grasp what this verse means. God is saying to Eve, and he's talking about the curse that's going to be on her. First he talks about the pain in childbirth. But then he says to her, he says, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Now, you can understand that in two different ways. But the first thing you've got to understand is that all of a sudden, their marriage, their relationship was no longer going to be a relationship between two equals. Because that's the way it was intended. In Genesis 1:27, we read that God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. He created them the same. He created them equally, and they were to be together in equality. But all of a sudden now, as we come into the third chapter, that's changed. Obviously, if the man is going to rule over the woman, there's no equality there. Now, a lot of people understand that as saying that men are supposed to be above women, and the husband rules the house and all that kind of stuff. You know what I'm talking about, right? And so that's the way God says it's supposed to be, because he said it right there. But you got to understand that words like that can be either what we call normative or descriptive. Now, what do I mean by that? Normative means this is the way it's supposed to be. Descriptive means this is simply the way it's going to be. And these words are descriptive, not normative. It was never God's plan. It was never God's design that our relationship should be unequal. It's just a description that says that your sin and the lack of the capacity for the intimacy that I created you with means that your relationships are going to be broken. And this is how it's going to show itself. The inequality between men and women that we've seen over the centuries is a reflection of the sin that has overtaken human nature. People still seek intimacy in relationships. We still want it. We still crave it. But all too often, we find it, we look for it in the wrong ways, in the wrong places, and in wrong people. We should have good, healthy marriages and relationships and friendships, and the church should be just wonderful and everything. We should always get along in every perfect way and never have conflict. We know that doesn't happen. We know our relationships don't work. We see our society reflecting that chasing after intimacy In so many ways, we have a sex-obsessed culture, don't we? And what that has become, it's a substitute for the intimacy that we need and want. People get into all kinds of sexual relationships because it looks like intimacy. I mean, let's face it, right? If the nakedness was a symbol of intimacy, the sexual relationship should be that too. But when it's reduced to a physical thing, it's a false intimacy. And our sex-obsessed culture reflects that chasing, but that failing to find it. God's plan from the beginning was very simply designed. Intimacy was designed for marriage between one man and one woman. The initial kind of relationship that Adam and Eve had that was destroyed. And now it's been replaced pretty much by anything goes. But we still live in a world of broken relationships. So how do we restore that? That's restored by love. Now, love, as I've said many times, is not a feeling. Love is an action. Love means what? To look out for the interest of the other ahead of the interest of yourself, even if it hurts, right? The exact opposite of what Adam was doing when he said it's her fault. The Apostle Paul put it this way. The exact opposite for Adam. Husbands, love your wives. How? Just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Put your life on the line. Die for her. The Bible talks about mutual submission. That's what it's all about. That's what flows out of love. Love requires humility. And humility is the opposite of pride. Pride is what we already saw was the undoing of the relationships. And love requires submission. And submission is the opposite of oppression, which is what we see God describing a relationship was going to be like when he said that the man would rule over his wife. That would be oppression. The Bible calls us to submission. These are the reflections of love, which is what we need to have, particularly as Christians. Finally, the last broken relationship, and of course the one that matters the most, is of course the broken relationship with God. And we see that most evidently is after they've sinned, and God, the Bible tells us, came for a walk through the garden. You gotta picture this. God is walking through the Garden of Eden. Now this is a really important picture because, what is he expecting? He's expecting, so to speak, knowing full well what's going on, that he's going to be able to go out and enjoy Adam and Eve. Let's go and have that fellowship that we have every day. This is what God intends for you and me. I come to the garden alone and him. And he walks with me, he talks with me, he tells me I am his own. Imagine that when you can see him face to face. But he comes into the garden and he says, Adam, Eve, where are you? Now isn't it interesting? They're hiding from God. But even though they've sinned, God's still looking for them. God still wants to have fellowship with them. But they're hiding. Now, so I read somewhere that someone said this, about when God says, where are you? He says, we must not read it as a policeman looking for a fugitive. We must read it as a parent looking for a lost child. God's heart is broken about what's happened. And the children that he loves so desperately are hiding from him. They're lost, but they're hiding. Imagine that if you're a parent and you can't find your child somewhere, and you're looking and you can't find them because they're hiding. Pain in God's heart. But this is what sin does. We hide from God. In his book, The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis talks about mythical stories about people who are in hell get one day a year they get to pay a visit to heaven. But interestingly, they find it to be a dreadful place. It's kind of hard for us to imagine that. I haven't read it for years, but I remember this image. He talks about, they come in this beautiful garden and they walk on the grass and it's like walking on nails. It's all too real for their brokenness. When we're still in our sin, God and everything to do with Him becomes dreadful, scary, unpleasant. For those who are in Christ, He's beautiful. For those who are in sin, God is not beautiful. That's why people create gods more to their own liking, in their own image, they say. They want to create gods that aren't so uncomfortable. And that's why not all religions are the same thing, like some people say. They're not equally valid. They're not equally true. They're human-made attempts to restore the relationship with God, but without adequately dealing with the problem of the broken relationship and what caused it. So how do we restore that relationship? Very simply, it's restored by grace through faith. Ephesians 2:8 says this, "For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and this is not of yourselves, it is a gift of God." See, the God who was looking for Adam and Eve in the garden never stopped looking because He loves us. And He gives us a gift that we receive by faith. And what is that gift? Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he said this, "All of this is from God, who reconciled," reconciliation, overcoming that broken relationship, "who reconciled us to Himself through Christ, and gave us the ministry of reconciliation." That God was reconciling the world to Himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. Isn't that a wonderful thing? The relationship, that broken relationship with God, is restored at the cross. And Jesus died and took the penalty for our sins that we don't have to anymore. That broken relationship can be healed. That our capacity for intimacy can be restored. That we can be, once again, what God intended us to be. What it's all about is restoring relationships. That's why the church exists. That's what the ministry of this core is all about, is to try and bring reconciliation. We want to reconnect with ourselves so we understand who we are, and we can become whole people again through self-awareness and understanding. We want to reconnect with other people through building of relationships. And that's why church is not something simply where we come on Sunday morning, or, if I come, I come, if I don't, I don't. It's about the relationships that we have with each other. It's one of the reasons why we started that koinonia, which is a more focused time where we can gather as a church on one Sunday a month. It's a small thing, but where we can focus on spending time together. So I encourage you to come. But let's even move beyond that. When's the last time you invited someone different into your home for dinner? We need to be building relationships one with another. Being inclusive more and more so we can reconnect with each other. And finally, of course, we're about reconnecting with God through salvation, through an experience of holiness, which is the filling of the Holy Spirit. Until we reach that, Till we achieve those, we're not going to achieve the others. My friends, when we come into Advent and we come into Christmas, remember that's what it's all about. The ministry of reconciliation. That we can reconnect with ourselves, with each other, but mostly about with God. As far as the curse is found, Jesus came down to do that. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the great